recently there's been a big story that there's been a suspension of operating licenses and new reactors in the United States. Can you tell us a little bit what's up with that?
Yeah. What's happened is the NRC made something called the waste confidence rule, and they kind of arbitrarily decided that it was perfectly acceptable to store nuclear waste above ground for as long as 100 years. A group took them to court, and the court decided that they really hadn't proved their case, and that there wasn't enough evidence to support the waste confidence rule. So the NRC just had to punt and say, well, we've got to go over and redo the rule. In the meantime, until the rule is redone, they will not issue any new license extensions or not issue any new operating permits. Now, that sounds pretty severe, but what they can do is they can waive their own requirements individually and allow these plants to continue to operate. So they can say, well, we're confident eventually we'll have confidence, so in the meantime we'll just continue your old license, but we won't give you the new one, but you can operate anyway. So the old Chairman Yatsko, who certainly wasn't beloved by the industry, basically said that he thought within 3 or 4 years they'd have this thing straightened out and they'd be back on track. So I think the industry is looking at it as a speed bump, that they think it may slow down a couple of reactors, but we're not going to be shutting reactors down in the meantime if the NRC has anything to do with it.
And in San Onofre, they apparently removed some structural supports to add some tubes or some other things. How did that ever get authorized?
Boy, that's a great question. At San Onofre, the old steam generator was built in the 1980s, and it had served its useful life, and they wanted to replace it. So they went to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they said, we're going to replace it in kind with one that's just like it. And what happened was it was nowhere near like the one they replaced it with. They put it in 2010 and the second one in 2011, turned them on, and within 18 months, the tubes had rattled to the point where they pretty much destroyed the steam generators. So their units have been shut down now since January, and likely will remain shut down for a long time to come, because they tried to come up with a modern design that had never been tried before, built by a vendor who had never built one of these before. And the net effect is they've got a plant now that this is the single biggest accident, near miss, the single biggest near miss in the nuclear industry since the Davis-Besse reactor back in 2002. What happened there was a rust hole in the nuclear reactor almost broke through and would have caused a loss of coolant accident. Well, this one is the next worst to Davis-Besse. They had 8 tubes that were on the edge of failing, and had there been a steam line break, they would have had an enormous release of radiation, much greater than they ever anticipated in their final safety analysis report. They would have had to evacuate a large portion of Southern California, and they would have had a meltdown. So we came close to a nuclear meltdown here at San Onofre because these tubes were on the edge of failing.
Recently, RadNet and some of the other radiation detection networks have detected some big spikes in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. What could have caused that? I don't have a lot of confidence in the data that's taken by these RadNet sites. There's so much variability, and there's so many people that with good intention may not have the right equipment, or there could be many other scientific issues involved. So I really don't know what's going on out in Pennsylvania. Okay, in Canada there was, I want to talk a little bit about the SOX meters, and how do they exactly work? Because I spoke with a physicist who said that 4,20 microsieverts is a negligible amount, but the SOAKS detectors say it's a dangerous radiation background. So how do we make sense of all that?
Yeah, making sense out of radiation data is a tough job, and you really need to get this into a laboratory where the instrumentation is better than handheld. You know, for you and I to have a handheld device, it's a really good thing because it can give an early warning and know whether or not we're in jeopardy. But unless you've got a really good scientific device, you know, like we're using at Worcester Poly and other institutions around the country, raw data taken by civilians, really, unless we can verify it in a serious lab, I can't jump to conclusions about how severe or how not severe the information is. We're going to be putting up in the next week or so a 15-minute video that talks about just the level of detail that a scientist really needs to be confident in the numbers. So when I see these numbers, it gets my attention, it gets my concern, but I don't feel necessarily that it's a good idea to broadcast it until I can verify it in the lab.
Now, I remember you had mentioned that you were accepting samples for laboratory testing. How did that work out?
We've been getting lab samples from around the country, around the world, you know, especially the West Coast, and more importantly, in Japan now, since the Fairwind site went up over a year ago. And the data's been compiled. There's a bunch of scientific papers in the works. You know, the one that's most prominent right now is the one that Marco Kaltofen did at the American Public Health Association. And that was back in October of last year, so 10 months ago. And we saw that, you know, air filters on cars, for instance, and kids' shoes were just loaded with cesium. So that number's been out there now for a year. But now we're seeing, working with people in Europe, a different group, we're focusing on dust, house dust. And we're asking people in Japan to send us their vacuum cleaner bags. And what we're finding, some of the bags are squeaky clean, which is great. And we tell the people that, and they can breathe a sigh of relief. But some of the bags are quite highly contaminated. We've got one bag from out at about 80 miles away from the reactor that's got 100,000 becquerels per kilogram. So that means that a 2-pound bag is giving 100,000 disintegrations every second. So that tells me that you know, the Japanese are not doing a very good job of informing the public about the ongoing public health issues for internal radiation. You know, they walk around with their handheld detectors, and if they're reading close to normal, everybody's happy. But the internal contamination in Japan is I believe, significant and totally ignored by the Japanese government. They could do a much better public health effort if they talk to people about vacuuming with high-efficiency particulate filters, wet dusting, and things like that. Because you know, the Japanese sleep on the floor. You know, they roll mats out at night, and they're down with the dust, which we know to be contaminated.
It was also really revealed that some of the contractors were removing some of their badges in order to maintain their profitability of their corporation. So this is probably a systemic thing, not just from the government, but with the companies that they're working with.
Moving badges or removing badges or covering badges with some sort of a protective layer is done all over the world. As a matter of fact, you'll see in cases, even in the United States, where, for instance, a welder wants to complete a weld. So he'll keep his badge, but he won't keep it on his arm near the work. He may put it on his foot, which is away from the work. And the net effect is that the badge underestimates the amount of exposure. There's been documented cases of deliberately leaving badges behind throughout the industry, not just in Japan. So I was not surprised that some Japanese contractors got caught doing it. They're lowering their exposure so they can make more money. When they go over the limit, they can't work anymore. So by keeping that badge protected, they can work longer and make more money. And unfortunately, Tokyo Electric has a worker shortage, and so therefore they're really not policing this very well either.
And what's the status right now of the removal of the rods? How did that go, and what's up with the fuel pools?
Well, on Unit 4, they pulled two rods from a reactor, from the spent fuel pool, that were never in the nuclear reactor, so they were fresh nuclear fuel. And they just wanted to see if they could do it, and they also began to sample what materials in the rods to look for salt or to look for boron and things like that, just to get an idea of the chemicals that might be attached to the material. The actual nuclear fuel that's hot, physically hot and radioactively hot, is still under as much water as they could possibly keep it under, and will likely be that way for at least another 18 months to come. Fairwinds is going to have a new video up on the whole issue of the spent fuel pool at Unit 4, and that should be coming up sometime between now and August 15th. We'll have that video up. It explains it in detail, but it is a very threatening situation. Nuclear fuel can burn in air, and nuclear fuel in that pool has more cesium than was ever released in all the bombs that were dropped in above-ground testing for 40 years. And so if the fuel were to burn, and that would be caused by an earthquake that cracks the pool, for instance, if that were to happen, Japan would be cut in half. And likely contamination would circle the northern hemisphere, conceivably being really significant. Of course, we're out here where no science has gone before. No one's ever really even thought of, oh my God, can a fuel pool catch fire? So we take a really hard look at that. We've got some never before seen video of that amplifies it. And my conclusion is it's really serious, and we need to get the fuel out of that pool just as quickly as possible, because the next earthquake isn't going to wait until we're done. We've got to get it out before the next earthquake comes.
And how do you evacuate Tokyo or Southern California?
Well, I'm not suggesting you're going to need to evacuate Southern California.
I'm just saying hypothetically, how would you? It's impossible, I believe. I mean, you can't evacuate Tokyo or Southern California. It's impossible. So I think we need to really keep monitoring this situation. A question from some of our team members: has there ever been a follow-up study on the downwinders of 3 Mile Island, like 20 years later?
The best follow-up study is by Dr. Steve Wing, and Wing gives a lecture on the Fairwinds website. So if it's pretty searchable. If you look up Steve Wing, 3 Mile Island, or something like that on our website, he's got a 30-minute explanation of what happened to the downwinders at 3 Mile Island. The problem is that there were no downwinders because there were no wind. It was a very calm day when the accident happened, and the radiation settled into the river valley. And when you take a look at the data that Steve Wing has, it's crystal clear that the cancer rates in the river valley are higher than the cancer rates on the hilltops that are a couple miles away. So his analysis is peer-reviewed, and it's solid as a rock.